I never imagined that after 35 years of pouring my heart and soul into raising my daughter, she would stand in my living room and tell me it was time to face reality. My name is Eleanor Bennett, and at 63, I was suddenly too frail and at risk, living in my own home, according to my daughter Vanessa. What she didn't know was that while she was planning my quiet disposal into a retirement community, I was sitting on a fortune that would change both our lives forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the day I brought Vanessa home from the Chi hospital. Her father had already left us by then, walked out when I was 7 months pregnant, saying he wasn't ready for the responsibility. I was 28, alone, terrified, but determined to give my daughter the world. For the next 3 decades, that's exactly what I did. I put aside my dreams of becoming an architect and instead took a stable job as an administrative assistant at Westfield Academy, a prestigious private school that would eventually accept Vanessa as a student through my employee benefit program. Every morning, I woke at 5 a.m. to prepare her lunch, iron her uniform, and help her with any homework she'd struggled with the night before. After school, I'd shuffle between my second job at a local bookstore and attending her ballet recitals, science fairs, and debate competitions. I never missed a single one. When Vanessa expressed interest in attending Brighton University, one of the most expensive colleges in the state, I sold my mother's antique jewelry collection and took out a second mortgage on our modest home. "Mom, I promise I'll make it. Worth every penny," she'd said, hugging me tight the day her acceptance letter arrived. I believed her completely. After graduation, Vanessa married Richard Thompson, a successful investment banker whose family owned a sprawling estate in Oak Ridge Heights. They built a custom home in the same neighborhood, a sleek modern mansion with floor-to-ceiling windows and a swimming pool that seemed to spill into the valley below. I attended their housewarming party in a dress I'd saved 3 months to buy, wanting to look like I belonged among Richard's colleagues and their wives with their designer clothes and carefully cultivated accents. "Eleanor, you must be so proud of Vanessa," Richard's mother Margaret had said, sipping champagne beside me. "It's wonderful to see someone from her background rise so far." I'd smiled politely, swallowing both my pride and a stinging retort. For Vanessa's sake, I always did. What Margaret Thompson didn't know, what none of them knew, was that for the past 15 years, alongside my administrative work, I had been writing mystery novels under the pen name E.J. Montgomery. My first 3 books had modest success, but my 4th novel, The Gardener's Daughter, unexpectedly became an international bestseller, followed by a film adaptation that broke box office records. The royalties had been pouring in for years, carefully managed by my publisher's financial team. I had never touched a penny of it, instead watching it grow into a substantial fortune. Why keep it secret? At first, it was fear. Fear that the money would disappear as quickly as it had come, that the success was a fluke. Then, as the years passed and my wealth grew, it became something else. I wanted to see if Vanessa would ever achieve success and still remember who had sacrificed everything to get her there. I wanted to know if the daughter I raised valued me beyond what I could give her. Last month, I received my answer. The betrayal. I had just finished brewing my morning tea when the doorbell rang. Outside stood Vanessa and Richard, both dressed, in what I recognized as their business meeting attire. Something in their matched expressions made my stomach tighten. "Mom, we need to talk," Vanessa said, not waiting for my invitation before stepping into the living room. Richard followed, his eyes scanning the familiar surroundings of my modest 3-bedroom home with poorly concealed disdain. "Tea?" I offered, already moving toward the kitchen. "This isn't a social call, Eleanor," Richard replied, his voice carrying that practiced smoothness I'd come to recognize as his professional tone. "We have a proposition to discuss." I settled into my favorite armchair, the one with worn armrests and a patch I'd sewn myself near the right cushion. I'm listening. Vanessa placed a glossy brochure on my coffee table. Sunset Meadows, she announced, as if presenting a grand prize. It's a premier assisted living community just 20 minutes from our home. I stared at the brochure without touching it. The cover showed smiling seniors playing card games in a sunlit common room. Assisted living? Mom, you're living alone in a house with stairs, Vanessa continued, her voice taking on that patient tone one might use with a child. Last month you mentioned your hip was bothering you, and yesterday when I called, you said you'd forgotten to pick up your prescription. These are warning signs. Of aging, dear, not incompetence, I replied, trying to keep my voice light. Everyone forgets things occasionally. Richard cleared his throat. Eleanor, we've spoken with the director at Sunset Meadows. They have an opening in their independent living section, with the option to transition to more comprehensive care as needed. We've already put down a deposit to hold the space. The teacup trembled slightly in my hand. You've already paid money without discussing it with me? Vanessa exchanged a glance with Richard before continuing. We knew you'd resist the idea, Mom. You've always been stubborn about accepting help. But you need to be realistic. This house is too big for you to maintain, and it's not safe for someone your age to be completely alone. I'm 63, not 93, I said, setting down my cup with deliberate care. And we want to make sure you reach 93, Vanessa countered. The community has round-the-clock medical staff, daily activities, and people your own age to socialize with. You've been complaining about loneliness since Dad left. Your father abandoned us 35 years ago, I interrupted, feeling heat rise to my face. I've never once complained about loneliness. Richard stepped in, his voice taking on that infuriatingly reasonable tone. Eleanor, we're thinking of your future. The house has great bones, but it needs significant updates. If you sold now, you could use the proceeds to cover most of your expenses at Sunset Meadows. We'd supplement whatever shortfall there might be. How generous, I murmured, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Mom, Vanessa sighed. This isn't about generosity. It's about responsibility. Richard and I are planning to start a family soon, and I can't be constantly worried about you falling or forgetting to take your medication. My eyes snapped to hers. Is that what this is about? Getting me settled somewhere so I won't be a burden when you have children? Don't be dramatic, Vanessa said, her patience clearly fraying. This is about making sure you're safe and well cared for. You always taught me to plan ahead. And what about my garden? My writing group? My volunteer work at the library? I asked, gesturing toward the window where my prized roses were in full bloom. My entire life is here. Richard's smile tightened. Sunset Meadows has gardening clubs, book clubs, and plenty of volunteer opportunities. You'll build a new life there, Eleanor. A more appropriate one for this stage. I felt something cold settle in my chest. And if I say no? Vanessa exhaled, sharply. Then you're being selfish and short-sighted. We've already done all the research and planning. The smart choice is obvious. I see, I said quietly. And when would I be expected to make this move? Richard glanced at his watch, a gesture I'd seen him make countless times when he was ready to conclude a meeting. They can hold the unit for 30 days. We've scheduled a tour for next Tuesday at 10 a.m. We'll pick you up. What about my house? I asked. We know a fantastic realtor, Vanessa replied, already pulling out her phone. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She specializes in helping seniors downsize. She can handle everything. You won't have to lift a finger. How convenient, I murmured. After they left, I sat in my silent living room for a long time, staring at the brochure they'd left behind. The smiling faces on the cover seemed to mock me. 35 years of sacrifice, of putting Vanessa first, of working 2 jobs while raising her alone, of helping her with homework despite my exhaustion, of scrimping and saving for her education, and now I was a problem to be managed, and tough. Inconvenience to be tucked away before the arrival of grandchildren. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The woman who had always prioritized her daughter's happiness above her own faded away, replaced by someone new, someone who remembered the fortune sitting untouched in her name and the power it could wield. I reached for my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to my publisher's financial advisor. The second was to a luxury real estate agent. It was time for Eleanor Bennett to stop being invisible. The hidden strength. The Oak Ridge Heights Real estate office was housed in a sleek glass building with marble floors and a reception desk that looked like it had been carved from a single piece of rare wood. I'd dressed carefully for this appointment. A simple but elegant navy dress I'd bought years ago for Vanessa's college graduation, paired with my mother's pearl earrings. I wasn't wearing designer labels, but I carried myself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was worth. Ms. Bennett? A tall woman with an impeccable bob and a cream-colored suit approached, hand extended. I'm Diana Maxwell. It's a pleasure to meet you. Please, follow me to my office. Diana's office featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the manicured gardens of Oak Ridge Heights. She gestured for me to take a seat in one of the leather chairs facing her glass desk. So, she began, folding her hands. You mentioned on the phone that you're interested in properties in this neighborhood. Oak Ridge is our most exclusive enclave, with homes typically starting at $3 million. What price range were you considering? I smiled. I'm particularly interested in 47 Hillcrest Drive. Diana's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose slightly. The Palmer Estate? That's one of our premier listings at $7.5 million. It just came on the market last week. She paused, studying me with new interest. If you don't mind my asking, are you working with a financial advisor on this purchase? I have my own team, I replied simply, opening my handbag and removing a letter. This is from my bank, confirming my financing approval. Diana scanned the document, her professional composure momentarily slipping as she registered the numbers. This is very comprehensive, she managed finally. May I ask what line of work you're in, Ms. Bennett? I'm a writer, I said. And please call me Eleanor. A writer, she repeated, clearly trying to reconcile my modest appearance with the financial statement before her. Well, Eleanor, given your position, I'd be delighted to arrange a private viewing of 47 Hillcrest. It's an extraordinary property. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, a home theater, wine cellar, and an infinity pool with views of the entire valley. The grounds are particularly spectacular, with mature landscaping and a rose garden that's been featured in Architectural Digest. The rose garden is what caught my attention, I admitted. That and the location. The location is unparalleled, Diana agreed. Oak Ridge sits on the highest point in the county, and Hillcrest Drive occupies the premier ridge. Every home there has protected views and complete privacy, while still being just minutes from the cultural center. I nodded. And it's right next door to 45 Hillcrest Drive, isn't it? Yes, that's correct. Do you know the owners? My daughter and her husband, I said, watching understanding dawn in Diana's eyes. They've recently suggested I might be happier in a retirement community. I thought I'd offer an alternative arrangement. A slow smile spread across Diana's face, the genuine kind that reaches the eyes, not the polished professional version she'd been wearing until now. I see. Well, in that case, I think we should schedule that viewing immediately. Would tomorrow morning work for you? The Palmer estate exceeded even the photographs I'd seen online. The grand entrance opened into a soaring foyer with a sweeping staircase and chandelier that caught the morning light, scattering tiny rainbows across marble floors. Each room flowed organically into the next, with walls of glass that blurred the boundary between inside and outside. The kitchen was a chef's dream. The library lined with built-in shelves that reached to the coffered ceiling, and the master suite occupied an entire wing with its own private terrace. But it was the garden that took my breath away. Descending from the main terrace, stone pathways wound through carefully designed flower beds, leading to a rose garden that showcased over 50 varieties in full bloom. Beyond the roses, the infinity pool appeared to spill directly into the valley view, creating the illusion that one could swim right off the edge of the world. The previous owner was a botanist, Diana explained as we walked among the roses. She spent 20 years perfecting this garden. It's been designed so something is always blooming, regardless of the season. I bent to inhale the fragrance of a particularly beautiful peach-colored bloom. "It's perfect," I said softly, already imagining mornings spent here with a notebook and pen, afternoons deadheading spent flowers and pruning branches. "I'll take it." Diana blinked. "You don't want to see the wine cellar or the home theater?" "I've seen enough," I replied. "And I'd like to close as quickly as possible. Would an all-cash offer expedite things?" 2 days later, I signed the papers making me the new owner of 47 Hillcrest Drive. The following morning, I called Vanessa. "Mom, I can't talk right now," she answered, her voice harried. "I'm in the middle of a meeting. Can I call you back this afternoon?" "Actually, dear, I was hoping you and Richard could join me for dinner tonight," I said. "I've made a decision about Sunset Meadows and I'd like to discuss it in person." There was a pause. "Oh, well, that's great, Mom. We have plans with the Andersons tonight, but I think we can reschedule. This is more important. Should we pick you up around 6? "No need," I replied. "I'll text you the address. 7 o'clock would be better for me." "An address? Are we meeting at a restaurant?" "You'll see," I said. "Dress nicely." At precisely 7:05 that evening, a sleek black Tesla pulled into the circular driveway of 47 Hillcrest Drive. I watched from the main terrace as Vanessa and Richard emerged, both looking confused as they took in the magnificent facade of the mansion. Vanessa checked her phone, presumably confirming the address I'd sent, while Richard straightened his tie and glanced around as if expecting to see other guests. I descended the grand staircase to the entryway, taking a moment to appreciate the irony of the situation. After years of feeling small in Vanessa's world, I was about to reclaim my power in the most dramatic way possible. I opened the door before they could ring the bell. "Mom?" Vanessa's eyes widened as she took in my appearance. I'd bought a new wardrobe befitting my new home. Tonight, I wore a simple but exquisitely tailored black dress and heels. "What are you doing here? Whose house is this?" "Mine," I replied, stepping aside to let them enter. "Please, come in." Richard's mouth literally fell open as they stepped into the foyer, taking in the soaring ceilings, the gleaming marble, the museum-quality art on the walls. "Eleanor, I don't understand," he managed finally. "How is this possible?" "Why don't we discuss it over dinner?" I suggested, leading them through to the formal dining room, where I'd arranged for a private chef to prepare a meal worthy of the occasion. "I believe you had questions about my living arrangements." Throughout the 7-course meal, I watched as confusion gave way to shock on their faces. I explained about E.J. Montgomery, the best-selling novels, the film adaptations, and the fortune I'd accumulated over 15 years while living in my modest home and working my administrative job. "But why didn't you tell us?" Vanessa demanded, her voice caught between hurt and indignation. "All these years, you let us think you were struggling. You let us worry about how you'd manage in retirement." "Did you worry?" I asked mildly. "Or did you simply find my potential dependence inconvenient?" Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Eleanor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We were only thinking of your well-being when we suggested Sunset Meadows." "Were you?" I took a sip of wine, savoring its complex notes. when you decided my home of 30 years should be sold, when you made plans for my future without consulting me, when you dismissed my concerns about leaving my garden and my community. Was that truly about my well-being, or about ensuring I wouldn't complicate your lives? That's not fair, Vanessa protested, though her eyes couldn't quite meet mine. We were worried about you living alone. Well, you'll be relieved to know I'm not alone anymore, I replied. I've hired a staff, a housekeeper, a gardener, a personal chef, and an assistant. And should I ever need medical attention, I've arranged for private healthcare providers who can come directly to me. Richard leaned forward, his financial advisor instincts clearly engaged. Eleanor, while this is all incredibly surprising, I have to ask, is this financially sustainable? Real estate at this level comes with substantial ongoing costs. I smiled. My most recent royalty statement is on the side table, if you'd care to take a look. My financial team assures me I could buy 3 more houses like this one and still have plenty for a comfortable retirement. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of awkward conversation and poorly concealed shock. As they prepared to leave, Vanessa finally asked the question I'd been waiting for. But why here, Mom? Why right next door to us? I walked them to the door, pausing in the grand foyer. You were right about one thing, Vanessa. Family should be close, especially as we age. Now you can check on me anytime you like, without having to drive all the way to Sunset Meadows. Isn't that convenient? The look on my daughter's face, a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and dawning understanding, told me she finally realized what she'd done. She had tried to diminish me, to fit me into a neat, manageable box labeled elderly mother, and in response, I had revealed my true self in the most unmistakable way possible. As they stepped outside, I added one final thought. Oh, and I've scheduled a housewarming party for next Saturday evening. I've invited the entire neighborhood, including the Thompsons and the Andersons. I do hope you'll attend. It would be awkward to explain your absence, living right next door and all. I closed the door on their stunned faces and walked through my new home, feeling truly powerful for the first time in decades. The game had changed, and I was finally making the rules. The confrontation. The following week brought a parade of unexpected visitors to my new home. First came the florists, delivering elaborate arrangements with cards expressing the neighborhood's excitement about meeting the mysterious author who had moved in next door. Then came Margaret Thompson, Richard's mother, her curiosity evidently overcoming her usual aloofness. Eleanor, she gushed, air-kissing both my cheeks in the foyer. What an extraordinary surprise! Richard and Vanessa mentioned you'd moved in, but they didn't say a word about all this. Her eyes swept over the marble floors, the crystal, chandelier, the tasteful art collection I'd begun assembling. It was a recent development, I replied, leading her into the main sitting room. Tea? How lovely, she murmured, settling onto a velvet sofa as a uniformed maid appeared with a silver tea service. I must confess, we've all been wondering about the identity of E.J. Montgomery for years. Such gripping stories, such psychological insight. And to think, you were right under our noses the entire time. Under your noses, I echoed with a smile. What an apt description. Margaret had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. Well, yes. I suppose we never really... That is to say, one makes assumptions, doesn't one? Based on appearances. Indeed one does, I agreed pleasantly. More tea? By the time Saturday arrived, word had spread throughout Oak Ridge Heights about the famous author who had secretly been the mother of Vanessa Thompson all along. My housewarming party was the most anticipated event of the season, with acceptances flooding in from people who had previously looked through me at Vanessa's gatherings. I arranged for caterers, hired a string quartet, and transformed the garden, into an enchanted evening landscape with thousands of tiny lights woven through the trees and floating candles in the reflecting pool. I wore a deep green gown that brought out the color of my eyes and swept my silver-streaked hair into an elegant chignon. Vanessa and Richard arrived precisely at 7, both looking tense despite their formal attire. "Mom," Vanessa said, kissing my cheek stiffly, "everything looks beautiful." "Thank you, dear," I replied. "You both remember Diana Maxwell, don't you? My real estate agent?" Diana, resplendent in a red dress, extended her hand to Richard. "Mr. Thompson, how lovely to see you again. Eleanor is such a delightful client, so decisive." She knew exactly what she wanted and wasted no time securing it. Richard's smile tightened. "Yes, my mother-in-law is full of surprises these days." As more guests arrived, I circulated through my new home, accepting congratulations and fielding questions about my next book. I caught glimpses of Vanessa throughout the evening, her expression growing increasingly strained as she watched her mother, the woman she had tried to relegate to a retirement home, being celebrated as a literary genius and the neighborhood's most intriguing new resident. Near midnight, as the party was winding down, I found Vanessa alone on the terrace, staring out at the valley lights. "Are you enjoying yourself?" I asked, joining her at the balustrade. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Is it punishment? Revenge?" I considered her question, watching the distant headlights winding through the valley below. "Do you remember when you were 7 and you wanted to join the community ballet school? We couldn't afford the tuition, but you were so determined. You made a presentation, construction paper charts showing how you'd help with extra chores, how you'd walk the neighbor's dog for pocket money to contribute." Vanessa nodded slowly. "You took on evening shifts at the bookstore to pay for it." "I did," I agreed. "And when you had your first recital, you were so nervous you nearly backed out. Do you remember what I told you?" "You said courage isn't about not being afraid," she replied softly. "It's about being afraid and doing the thing anyway." "Exactly." I turned to face her directly. "Last week, you and Richard tried to make me feel that my independence was something to fear, that my age made me incapable, that my life needed to be managed by others. You made plans for me without my consent, dismissing everything I valued." Tears welled in Vanessa's eyes. "Mom, we were worried about you. We wanted you to be safe." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But you didn't see me, Vanessa. You saw a problem to solve. You didn't ask what I wanted or needed. You decided for me. And in doing so, you made me invisible, just as your father did all those years ago when he decided that parenthood was too inconvenient." "That's not fair," Vanessa protested. "Dad abandoned us. We were trying to take care of you. By taking away my agency, by making decisions about my home, my community, my entire life without consulting me." I shook my head. "That's not care, Vanessa. That's control." She looked away, a tear slipping down her cheek. "So this is punishment. Moving in next door, throwing this extravagant party, showing everyone that we were wrong about you." "No," I said gently. "This isn't punishment, Vanessa. It's a boundary. For 35 years, I put your needs before my own. I let you define me as simply your mother with no identity beyond that role. When you tried to put me away in Sunset Meadows, you were continuing that pattern, defining me by your convenience, not my personhood." I gestured toward the magnificent home behind us. "This house, this party, they're not about shaming you. They're about reclaiming my right to define my own life, to be seen as a whole person, not just an aging mother who needs to be managed." Vanessa was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the garden where the last of the guests were saying their goodbyes. "I never knew about your writing," she said finally. "All those years, you had this whole other life, this talent, this success, and you never shared it with me. Why?" The question hung between us, heavy with all the unspoken hurts and expectations of our relationship. At first, it was fear, I admitted. Fear that the success wouldn't last, that I'd lose what little security we had. But later. I paused, searching for the right words. Later, I realized I needed something that was just mine, something that couldn't be diminished or taken away. Is that how you felt? Vanessa asked, her voice small. That I would diminish your accomplishments? Not intentionally, I replied. But yes, I worried that my success would become about you, about what it could provide for you, about how it reflected on you, rather than being recognized as my achievement. Just as my house became something to be sold for your convenience, rather than the home I'd built for myself. Vanessa was silent for a long time. Finally, she turned to me, her expression softened by understanding. I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't see what I was doing. I was so focused on what I thought was best that I never asked what you wanted. And now? Now, she sighed. I'm trying to see you, really see you, maybe for the first time. Not just as my mother, but as Eleanor Bennett. Best-selling author and apparently the owner of the most beautiful house in Oak Ridge Heights. I smiled, feeling something tight in my chest begin to loosen. That's a start. The reclamation. In the months that followed, my life transformed in ways I never could have imagined. My new home became a sanctuary, a place where I could write, garden, and entertain on my own terms. The rose garden flourished under my care, and I added a vegetable patch that supplied my kitchen with fresh produce year-round. My 7th novel, written largely on the terrace overlooking the valley, became my most successful yet. Critics praised its surprising depth and nuanced exploration of family dynamics, little knowing how much of my own experience had informed the narrative. I began hosting a monthly literary salon that quickly became the most coveted invitation in Oak Ridge Heights, with authors, professors, and artists gathering to discuss ideas over fine wine and chef-prepared meals. Vanessa and I established a new relationship, more cautious than before, but also more honest. She stopped by every Sunday for brunch, sometimes with Richard, sometimes alone. We talked about my writing process, her work challenges, the complexities of marriage. Gradually, tentatively, we were learning to see each other as adults with separate lives but genuine affection. The day she told me she was pregnant was also the day she apologized properly for trying to send me to Sunset Meadows. I was scared, she admitted as we sat in the garden, surrounded by late summer blooms. Not just about you getting older, but about becoming a mother myself. I think I was trying to organize everything, to control all the variables so I wouldn't feel so terrified. Motherhood is terrifying, I agreed, reaching over to squeeze her hand. It opens you up to a kind of vulnerability nothing else can match. But it's also magnificent, watching this person you created become themselves, separate from you, but connected in the deepest ways. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. Do you think I'll be good at it? You'll make mistakes, I told her honestly. Every parent does, but you'll learn from them, and you'll love fiercely, and that will matter more than anything else. 6 months later, I held my granddaughter for the first time, a tiny, perfect being with Vanessa's delicate features and curious eyes. They named her Emily Jane, after my pen name, a gesture of reconciliation that moved me deeply. As I rocked Emily in the nursery, Vanessa and Richard had prepared a room with windows overlooking my property, so the baby could see her grandmother's, roses even from her crib. I felt a profound sense of coming full circle. I had raised Vanessa alone, pouring all my love and energy into giving her opportunities I never had. I had hidden my success out of fear, then revealed it out of necessity. I had reclaimed my identity and established boundaries that allowed me to be seen as a complete person, not just in relation to others. And now, holding this new life, I understood that the greatest gift I could give both Vanessa and Emily was the example of a woman who had learned, finally, to honor her own worth. Last week, as I was pruning roses in the garden, I overheard a conversation between two women walking their dogs along the street that separates my property from Vanessa's. "That's Eleanor Bennett's place," one woman said, pointing toward my house. "The author. Her daughter lives right next door." "How convenient," the other replied, "especially with a new baby. Built-in grandmother care whenever they need it." I smiled to myself, snipping a withered bloom from its stem. They had it backward. Of course. I hadn't moved next door to Vanessa for her convenience. I'd done it to teach her, and myself, the most important lesson of all: that love without respect is merely obligation, and that true family means seeing each other clearly, flaws and gifts alike. As I gathered a bouquet of roses to bring to Emily, I thought about the story I would tell her someday, when she was old enough to understand. Not a fairy tale about a grandmother who lived in a mansion, but a true story about a woman who discovered, at 63, that it's never too late to rewrite your own ending. The grand mahogany front doors of my new mansion swung open silently on well-oiled hinges as I stepped inside, carrying only my purse and a small overnight bag. The cavernous foyer with its marble floors and sweeping staircase still felt surreal, like I'd accidentally walked onto a movie set rather than into my own home. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden patterns across pristine surfaces that had never known a single fingerprint or scuff mark. "Mrs. Bennett? I'm Claire, your house manager." A woman in her 40s with a neat bob and intelligent eyes approached from a side hallway, extending her hand. "The agency sent me ahead to ensure everything is prepared for your arrival." I shook her hand, surprised by the firmness of her grip. "Please, call me Eleanor, and thank you, though I wasn't expecting anyone quite so soon." Claire smiled, professional but warm. "The previous owners employed a full-time staff of 6. Ms. Maxwell mentioned you might prefer something more modest to start, so I've arranged for a housekeeper who will come 3 times weekly, a gardener who specializes in roses, and a part-time chef who can prepare meals in advance or cook for special occasions. I'll handle everything else: scheduling, maintenance issues, and any other concerns that arise." I blinked, momentarily overwhelmed. Yesterday, I'd been wiping down my own kitchen counters and pulling weeds from my modest garden beds. Today, I had a house manager discussing my staff. "That's very thoughtful, but I'm not sure I need—" "If I may," Claire interjected gently, "a property of this size requires considerable attention. You're welcome to be as hands-on as you like, especially with the garden, which I understand is a passion of yours, but having reliable help will free you to enjoy your new home rather than becoming overwhelmed by its demands." She had a point. The Palmer estate sprawled across 3 acres, with the main house alone spanning over 12,000 square feet. Even dusting would be a monumental task, let alone maintaining the elaborate gardens and swimming pool. "You're right. Of course," I conceded. "I'm just not accustomed to all this." Claire's expression softened with understanding. "Few people are, initially. Shall I show you around? The movers called to say they're about an hour away with your personal belongings." For the next 45 minutes, Claire guided me through what felt like a small kingdom. Beyond the grand public spaces I'd seen during my initial viewing, the formal living and dining rooms, library and conservatory, there were cozy nooks and practical spaces I'd barely registered. A morning room that caught the early light, a fully equipped catering kitchen behind the main one, a temperature-controlled wine cellar with empty racks awaiting bottles I'd never collected, and a home theater with plush seating for 20. The previous owner was quite the entertainer, Claire explained as we passed through a game room complete with billiards table and fully stocked bar. The Palmer family hosted legendary parties here for decades. I'm more of a quiet evening. With a good book person myself, I admitted. Claire nodded knowingly. The library is exceptional. And the third-floor study has the best views in the house, perfect for writing. I looked at her sharply. How did you know I write? A faint smile touched her lips. Ms. Maxwell mentioned your E.J. Montgomery. My mother has read every one of your books twice. She'll be beside herself when she learns I'm working for you. The name still felt strange attached to me in conversation, like an ill-fitting coat someone had draped over my shoulders. For 15 years, E.J. Montgomery had existed as my secret self, the part of me that created worlds and characters far removed from my modest reality. Now that identity was merging with Eleanor Bennett, administrative assistant and single mother, creating someone new I was still getting to know. Please don't tell anyone just yet, I said. I'm still adjusting to being public. Of course. Claire agreed immediately. Your privacy is my highest priority. We continued upstairs to the bedroom suites. The master occupied the entire east wing of the second floor, with a sitting area, massive walk-in closets, and a bathroom that rivaled luxury spas I'd only seen in magazines. 3 guest suites filled the remainder of the floor, each with its own bathroom and distinctive design scheme. And upstairs? I asked, glancing toward the third floor. Home office, media room, and 2 more bedrooms, Claire replied. Would you like to see them now, or shall we continue to the grounds? Before I could answer, my phone chimed with a text message. I glanced down at the screen and felt my stomach tighten. Vanessa. Mom, went by your house but you weren't there. The neighbor said you left with suitcases this morning. Is everything okay? You haven't forgotten about our appointment at Sunset Meadows tomorrow, have you? I stared at the message, a complex mix of emotions rising in my chest. My daughter still had no idea I'd purchased a $7 million mansion next door to hers, or that I had precisely zero intention of touring Sunset Meadows tomorrow or any other day. Part of me wanted to text back immediately with a photo of my new marble foyer, but wisdom prevailed. This revelation deserved a more personal touch. Claire, I think I'd like to see the grounds now, I said, slipping my phone back into my pocket. Particularly the rose garden. The gardens exceeded even my initial impression. Stone pathways wound through meticulously planned beds, featuring everything from ancient oak trees to delicate Japanese maples, creating distinct rooms, separated by hedges or architectural features. A charming gazebo overlooked a koi pond where orange and white fish flashed beneath lily pads. A kitchen garden contained raised beds of herbs and vegetables, and a small orchard promised apples, peaches, and cherries in season. But it was the rose garden that truly took my breath away. Centered around a limestone fountain depicting water nymphs in eternal dance, concentric circles of rose beds displayed every variety imaginable. Climbers scaling decorative trellises, floribundas creating masses of color, hybrid teas standing proud on single stems, and old garden roses with their intoxicating fragrances. Even now, in late summer, many were still blooming gloriously. The previous owner documented every variety, Claire said, handing me a leather-bound notebook she'd somehow produced. Complete with care instructions. I opened the book reverently, finding meticulously labeled sketches of the garden layout with each rose identified by both common and Latin names. Handwritten notes detailed pruning schedules, fertilizer preferences, and observations about performance through different seasons. This is extraordinary, I murmured, running my fingers over the carefully penned pages. A lifetime of knowledge. Mrs. Palmer was in her 80s when she passed, Claire confirmed. She worked in this garden every day until the end. Her daughter said it's what kept her young. I looked up sharply. Her daughter sold the property? Claire nodded. Mrs. Palmer left it to her only child, but Eliza lives in Europe and couldn't bear the thought of the house sitting empty. She was delighted when Ms. Maxwell told her about you, especially when she learned you're a gardener yourself. she said her mother would have approved. Something about this revelation touched me deeply. Another woman, another mother, had poured her heart into this place. Her daughter had understood its value enough to ensure it passed to someone who would honor that legacy rather than simply seeing it as real estate to be liquidated. "I hope I can do it justice," I said softly. "I think you already are," Claire replied, watching as I knelt to examine a particularly beautiful golden rose with a rich, spicy scent. The movers arrived shortly afterward, their trucks looking curiously small in the circular driveway designed for grander vehicles. My lifetime of possessions, furniture, clothes, books, kitchen items, that had comfortably filled my 3-bedroom home would barely furnish a guest room in this mansion. I felt a moment of panic at the thought of rattling around in such vast emptiness. "Don't worry about filling every space immediately," Claire advised, seeming to read my thoughts. "The best homes evolve over time. Choose a few areas to make completely yours, and the rest will follow naturally." I decided to focus on the master suite, my future writing study, and the kitchen, the spaces where I'd spend most of my time. The movers placed my familiar bedroom furniture in the vast master, where my queen bed looked almost childlike against the soaring tray ceiling. My modest desk found a home in the 3rd-floor study with its panoramic views, and my beloved collection of copper cookware hung proudly in the chef's kitchen, gleaming in the afternoon light. By early evening, the movers had departed, leaving Claire and me alone in the house that was now, improbably, mine. She'd ordered dinner from a local restaurant. Nothing too fancy, just comfort food served on the kitchen island rather than in the formal dining room. "Will you be all right here tonight?" she asked as she prepared to leave. "It can take time to adjust to the sounds of a new house, especially one this size." "I'll be fine," I assured her, though part of me wondered if I'd sleep at all in this strange new environment. "I've lived alone for a long time," Claire nodded, collecting her things. "I've programmed my number into your phone as well as the security system. Don't hesitate to call for any reason, no matter how small." After she left, I wandered through the silent rooms, trailing my fingers along unfamiliar surfaces, trying to absorb the reality of my new circumstances. In the library, I found myself standing before shelves that had been emptied of the previous owner's books, waiting for mine to fill the spaces. I made a mental note to ask Claire about finding a good bookshop tomorrow. In the master bathroom, I ran a bath in the enormous soaking tub, adding scented oil I found in a basket of luxury products Claire had thoughtfully arranged. As I sank into the steaming water, I closed my eyes and tried to process the whirlwind of the past week. 7 days ago, I'd been Eleanor Bennett, administrative assistant at Westfield Academy, widowed mother of 1, living quietly in the same modest home I'd owned for decades. Today, I was Eleanor Bennett, secret millionaire author, owner of one of the most prestigious properties in Oak Ridge Heights, with a house manager and staff at my disposal. And tomorrow, I would reveal this transformation to my daughter, who believed I needed assistance managing my own medications and couldn't be trusted to live independently anymore. I slept surprisingly well in my familiar bed surrounded by unfamiliar grandeur. Morning light filtered through sheer curtains, casting a golden glow across polished wood floors as I padded to the kitchen in search of coffee. To my surprise, I found a freshly brewed pot waiting, along with a basket of still-warm pastries and a note from Claire explaining she'd let herself in early to stock the refrigerator and pantry with essentials. After breakfast on the terrace overlooking the valley, a view I suspected I'd never tire of, I took my phone and composed a careful text to Vanessa. "I've had a change of plans regarding Sunset Meadows. Instead, I'd like you and Richard to join me for dinner tonight at 7 p.m. I have something important to discuss. I'll text you the address later." Her response came quickly. "Mom, we've already rescheduled with the Andersons for this. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." I felt a flash of the old familiar guilt, the instinct to accommodate to avoid inconveniencing my daughter, followed immediately by a new, steelier resolve. This is non-negotiable, Vanessa. I'll see you at 7. Then I silenced my phone and headed to the garden, where I spent the morning getting acquainted with each rose variety, consulting Mrs. Palmer's meticulous notes, and making plans for fall. Pruning. By lunchtime, I had dirt under my fingernails and a deep sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. Claire returned mid-afternoon, bringing with her a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. "Eleanor, this is Marcus Bellamy," she introduced. "He's the executive chef I mentioned, available for special occasions or regular meal preparation, depending on your preferences." Marcus bowed slightly, his posture conveying the quiet confidence of someone who had mastered his craft long ago. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Bennett. Claire mentioned you're hosting a small dinner party this evening. I'd be honored to prepare something suitable for the occasion." I hesitated only briefly before accepting his offer. While I enjoyed cooking, tonight's revelation called for something more polished than my home cooking. "Nothing too elaborate," I cautioned. "Just 3 people, including myself. And please call me Eleanor." Marcus nodded gravely. "Simple but elegant. I understand completely." While he took inventory of the kitchen and pantry, Claire guided me to the walk-in closet off the master suite, where she'd arranged my clothing with meticulous care. "I hope you don't mind, but I took the liberty of ordering a few items that might be useful for entertaining. They arrived this morning." She indicated several garment bags hanging on a separate rack. Inside, I found evening wear in my size. Simple, but beautifully tailored pieces in luxurious fabrics. Nothing flashy or aggressively trendy, but definitely a step up from my usual practical attire. "How did you know my size?" I asked, fingering the sleeve of a midnight blue dress that appealed to me immediately. Claire smiled enigmatically. "It's my job to anticipate needs. If none of these appeal, we can certainly return them." "No, they're lovely," I assured her, already planning to wear the blue dress tonight. "Thank you for your thoughtfulness." At 6:30, I stood in the grand foyer, nervously smoothing the silk of my new dress and wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. The house smelled divine. Marcus had prepared what he called a seasonal tasting menu highlighting late summer's bounty, and Claire had arranged fresh flowers from the garden throughout the main rooms. Everything was perfect, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was playing a role in someone else's life. "Stop it," I told myself firmly. "This is your life now. You've earned it." At precisely 7 o'clock, the doorbell chimed. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and opened the door to find Vanessa and Richard on the doorstep, both dressed formally and looking utterly confused. "Mom?" Vanessa's eyes widened as she took in both my appearance and the magnificent entrance behind me. "What are you doing here? Whose house is this?" "Mine," I replied simply, stepping aside to let them enter. "Please come in." Their shock was almost comical as they stepped into the foyer, heads tilting back to take in the soaring ceiling and crystal chandelier. Richard's mouth literally fell open as he turned in a slow circle, absorbing the museum-quality art and antique furnishings that had come with the house. "I don't understand," Vanessa managed finally. "How is this possible?" "Let's discuss it over dinner," I suggested, leading them through to the formal dining room, where Marcus had set a table that would have been at home in a 5-star restaurant. "I believe you had questions about my living arrangements." Throughout the exquisite meal that followed, I watched confusion, shock, and finally understanding dawn on their faces as I explained about E.J. Montgomery, the novels, the film adaptations, and the fortune I'd accumulated over 15 years. "But why didn't you tell us?" Vanessa demanded, her voice caught between hurt and indignation. "All these years, you let us think you were struggling." "Did I?" I asked mildly. "Or did you simply assume I was struggling because it fit your perception of me?" Richard cleared his throat, setting down his fork. "Eleanor, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We were only thinking of your well-being when we suggested Sunset Meadows. Were you? I took a sip of the excellent wine Marcus had selected. When you decided my home of 30 years should be sold, when you made plans for my future without consulting me, when you dismissed my concerns about leaving my garden and my community, was that truly about my well-being? That's not fair, Vanessa protested, though her eyes couldn't quite meet mine. We were worried about you living alone. Well, you'll be relieved to know I'm not alone anymore, I replied. I've hired a staff, a house manager, a chef, a gardener, and others who will ensure this property continues to run smoothly. And, should I ever need medical attention, I've arranged for private healthcare providers who can come directly to me. Richard leaned forward, financial advisor instincts clearly engaged despite his evident shock. Eleanor, while this is all incredibly surprising, I have to ask, is this sustainable long-term? Real estate at this level comes with substantial ongoing costs. I smiled and gestured toward a side table where I'd placed copies of my most recent royalty statements and investment portfolio summaries. Feel free to review the numbers yourself, Richard. My financial team assures me I could buy 3 more houses like this one and still have plenty for a comfortable retirement. He examined the documents with poorly concealed astonishment while Vanessa sat in uncharacteristic silence, pushing food around her plate. But why here, Mom? She asked finally, her voice small. Why this neighborhood? Why this house? I set down my wine glass carefully. Several reasons. The garden is extraordinary. You know how I've always loved roses. The house itself has wonderful spaces for writing. And of course, it's conveniently located near my family. I met her eyes directly. You were right about one thing, Vanessa. Family should be close, especially as we age. Now you can check on me anytime you like, without having to drive all the way to Sunset Meadows. The look that crossed her face, a mixture of embarrassment, shock, and dawning understanding, told me she finally realized what she had done. She had tried to make me small, to fit me into a neat box labeled elderly mother, and in response, I had revealed myself in the most unmistakable way possible. I had no idea, she whispered. All these years you were this. Other person. Not another person, I corrected gently. Just more of who I've always been than you were able to see. Richard, still processing the financial documents, looked up with newfound respect. Eleanor, these numbers are extraordinary. You've been incredibly successful. Yes, I agreed simply. I have. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of awkward conversation and poorly concealed shock. As they prepared to leave, Richard paused in the foyer, looking around once more with the expression of someone trying to permanently imprint a memory. Your home is beautiful, Eleanor, he said sincerely. Truly remarkable. Thank you, I replied. Oh, and I've scheduled a housewarming party for next Saturday evening. I've invited the entire neighborhood, including both your parents. I do hope you'll attend. Vanessa's eyes widened slightly at the mention of her in-laws. The entire neighborhood? You're going public as E.J. Montgomery? It seemed time, I said with a small smile. After all, I'm not getting any younger. Isn't that what you've been telling me? After they left, I wandered through my new home, feeling a curious mixture of exhilaration and melancholy. The look on my daughter's face, the shock, the recalibration of everything she thought she knew about her mother had been exactly what I'd hoped for, and yet something about it left me feeling hollow. For decades, I'd poured everything into being Vanessa's mother. I'd shaped my life around her needs, sublimated my own ambitions to ensure her success, accepted the subtle condescension from her in-laws and friends, because confronting it might have damaged her social standing. Even my secret career as E.J. Montgomery had been compartmentalized, kept separate from my identity as Eleanor Bennett, devoted mother and school administrator. Now, having merged those identities in the most dramatic way possible, I found myself wondering, who was I, really? Without the secrecy, without the struggle, without the constant accommodation of others' expectations, who was Eleanor Bennett? I made my way to the third-floor study where my familiar desk now sat before windows overlooking the twinkling valley lights. Opening my laptop, I began to write. Not a novel this time, but a journal entry, the first in what would become a nightly ritual of reflection. Today, I became visible, I typed. After decades of living in the margins of my own life, I stepped into the center. It should feel like victory, but instead, I find myself wondering what comes next. When you've spent your entire adult life defined by service to others, as a mother, as an employee, who are you when that service is no longer required? When the masks come off and the roles fall away, what remains? I continued writing until the sky began to lighten with pre-dawn glow. Finally, exhausted but clearer in my purpose, I made my way to bed. As I drifted toward sleep, one certainty remained. Whatever came next would be on my terms, not anyone else's. The week between the dinner with Vanessa and my housewarming party passed in a whirlwind of activity. Under Claire's expert guidance, the house transformed from merely stunning to genuinely magical. Fresh flowers appeared in every room, subtle lighting enhanced architectural features, and comfortable seating arrangements were created to encourage conversation among guests. Marcus planned a menu featuring seasonal delicacies and signature cocktails, while a small army of temporary staff was hired to ensure flawless service throughout the evening. I found myself surprisingly involved in the preparations, discovering a latent talent for entertaining I'd never had opportunity to develop before. Meanwhile, word had spread throughout Oak Ridge Heights about the famous author who had secretly been living in their midst all along. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from neighbors who had previously looked through me at Vanessa's gatherings, now eager to claim acquaintance with E.J. Montgomery. Invitations flooded in for lunches, charity galas, and exclusive social gatherings I'd never been considered for previously. The most surprising visit came 3 days before the party, when Margaret Thompson, Richard's formidable mother and longtime social queen of Oak Ridge Heights, appeared at my door bearing an orchid in full bloom. "Eleanor," she gushed, air-kissing both my cheeks as Claire showed her into the living room. "What an extraordinary surprise! Richard and Vanessa mentioned you'd moved in, but they didn't say a word about all this." Her eyes swept over the space with barely disguised avarice. "It was a recent development," I replied, gesturing for her to sit while Claire quietly arranged for tea. "Would you care for something to drink?" "How lovely," she murmured, settling onto a velvet sofa as a uniformed maid appeared with a silver tea service. I must confess, we've all been wondering about the identity of E.J. Montgomery for years. Such gripping stories, such psychological insight. And to think, you were right under our noses the entire time. "Under your noses," I echoed with a smile. "Yes, I suppose I was." Margaret had the grace to look momentarily discomfited. "Well, yes. I suppose we never really— that is to say, one makes assumptions, doesn't one? Based on appearances." "Indeed one does," I agreed pleasantly. "More tea?" She accepted the offered cup, her eyes continuing to catalog the room's details. "Richard tells me you've invited the entire neighborhood for Saturday. So ambitious for your first event here. If you like, I'd be happy to help with the arrangements. I've planned countless gatherings in Oak Ridge over the years, and I know exactly who should be seated next to whom, which caterers are reliable, that sort of thing." The offer was delivered with practiced graciousness, but I recognized it for what it was, an attempt to position herself at the center of what was already becoming the social event of the season. "That's very kind," I replied, "but everything is well in hand. Claire has connections with excellent vendors, and as for seating arrangements, well, I've always preferred the more relaxed approach of allowing people to mingle freely. Margaret's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Oh, I see. Well, naturally you know best. She set down her teacup with a slight clink. I must say, Eleanor, I'm absolutely fascinated by how you managed to keep your writing career so completely secret. All these years, even from Vanessa. It must have required such discipline. The question lingered in the air, her curiosity barely disguised as admiration. I've always been a private person, I said simply, and my writing has been precious to me, something I wanted to protect from outside judgment or expectations. Of course, Margaret nodded, though her expression suggested she found this explanation insufficient. Still, such success. The film adaptations alone must have been quite lucrative. I smiled, refusing to satisfy her thinly veiled inquiry about my finances. They've been gratifying, certainly. Seeing my characters brought to life by talented actors has been a unique experience. Margaret leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice conspiratorially. You know, my husband Charles sits on the board of the Oak Ridge Arts Foundation. They're always looking for distinguished patrons. Perhaps you'd be interested in attending their fall gala? As our guests, of course. And there it was, the real purpose of her visit. I was no longer Vanessa's embarrassingly ordinary mother, but a potential social asset, a celebrity whose presence could enhance the Thompsons' standing in the community. How thoughtful, I replied noncommittally. I'll consider it. By the time Margaret left, I had fielded a dozen similar veiled invitations and politely deflected every attempt to extract details about my financial situation. The visit left me with a curious sense of vindication tinged with sadness. For years, this woman had treated me with thinly veiled condescension, making me feel small and insignificant in my daughter's world. Now she was practically courting my favor. Not because she'd discovered my character or intelligence, but because I'd revealed my success. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was still the same person I had always been. Only the packaging had changed. Saturday evening arrived with perfect weather, warm enough for guests to spill onto the terraces and gardens, yet cool enough for comfort. At Claire's suggestion, I had hired a string quartet to play in the conservatory, their music drifting through the open doors like a gentle breeze. Hundreds of candles illuminated the gardens, transforming the already beautiful landscape into something truly enchanted. I chose a simple emerald gown that Claire had selected, its elegance understated but unmistakable. As I fastened my mother's pearls around my neck, the only valuable jewelry I owned, I studied my reflection in the mirror. The woman who gazed back at me seemed both familiar and strange. My same silver-streaked hair and hazel eyes, yet there was a confidence in her posture, a quiet assurance I didn't recognize. Mrs. Bennet? The first guests are arriving. Claire announced softly from the doorway. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and stepped into my new role as hostess of Oak Ridge Heights' most talked-about social event of the season. The next several hours passed in a glittering blur. Neighbors who had previously looked through me at community gatherings now hung on my every word, laughing too enthusiastically at my mild observations and nodding sagely at the most mundane comments. Richard's colleagues from the investment firm competed to demonstrate their literary knowledge, quoting passages from my novels with varying degrees of accuracy. Women who had always greeted me with the barest politeness now claimed long-standing admiration for my work. I simply devoured The Gardener's Daughter, gushed Patricia Wellington, wife of the hospital board president and notorious socialite climber. Such penetrating insight into class dynamics. I told Charles when we finished it, this author understands our world. And to think you were right here among us all along. I smiled, resisting the urge to point out that The Gardener's Daughter was a scathing critique of exactly the kind of social hierarchy Patricia so vigorously defended. How kind of you to say so. I've always found people fascinating in all their complexity. Vanessa and Richard arrived precisely at 7, both looking tense despite their formal attire. Vanessa kissed my cheek stiffly while Richard surveyed the already crowded rooms with evident surprise. "Quite a turnout, Eleanor," he observed, accepting a champagne flute from a passing server. "Half the neighborhood seems to be here." "More than half, I believe," I replied. "People are curious about the mysterious author in their midst." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Everyone's talking about it. Mom, do you really think this is wise? Going public so suddenly?" "Why wouldn't it be?" I asked, genuinely curious about her concern. She glanced around, lowering her voice. "It's just such a dramatic change. Yesterday you were—" She stopped abruptly, seeming to realize what she had been about to say. "I was what, Vanessa?" I pressed gently. "Invisible? Unremarkable? Someone to be managed rather than celebrated?" A flush crept up her neck. "That's not fair. I never thought of you that way." "Didn't you?" I held her gaze until she looked away. "Well, in any case, the cat is out of the bag now. I'm afraid you'll have to adjust to having a mother people actually want to talk to." It was unkind, perhaps, but the slight flinch my words produced gave me a satisfaction I wasn't entirely proud of. Before Vanessa could respond, we were interrupted by the arrival of Margaret and Charles Thompson, both dressed with studied elegance. "Eleanor, darling," Margaret exclaimed, embracing me with practiced warmth. "What a magnificent evening you've created. Everyone is simply enchanted." She turned to Vanessa and Richard. "Isn't this extraordinary? Your mother has such natural flair for entertaining. It must be where you get it from, Vanessa dear." I caught the flash of irritation in my daughter's eyes. For years, she had worked to cultivate Margaret's approval, modeling her own entertaining style after her mother-in-law's. Now Margaret was suggesting that Vanessa's social skills came from me, the mother she had long discounted. "Actually," Vanessa replied with brittle brightness, "I learned everything I know about hosting from you, Margaret." Charles Thompson, a distinguished man with silver hair and the ruddy complexion of someone who enjoyed both good wine and outdoor sports, stepped forward to kiss my hand. "Eleanor, I must congratulate you not only on this splendid gathering but on your literary achievements. The Midnight Garden kept me up until dawn. Masterful work." "How kind of you to say so," I replied, noting with private amusement that The Midnight Garden was not, in fact, one of my titles. "I'm so pleased you could join us tonight." As the evening progressed, I circulated through my home, engaging in dozens of similar conversations. People who had known me for years suddenly discovered I was interesting, insightful, worthy of their attention. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the same person I had always been, with the same thoughts, the same observations, the same quiet humor. Only my context had changed. Near midnight, as the party began winding down, I found Vanessa alone on the terrace, staring out at the valley lights. She startled slightly when I joined her at the balustrade. "Quite a view, isn't it?" I said softly. She nodded, her profile illuminated by the garden lights. "It's beautiful. Richard and I looked at this property when it first came on the market, but even he thought it was excessive." She turned to face me directly. "Why didn't you tell me, Mom? About the books, about the money, any of it?" The question hung between us, laden with all our unspoken history. In truth, I had asked myself the same thing many times over the years. Why keep my success secret, especially from my only child? At first it was fear, I admitted. Fear that the success wouldn't last, that it was a fluke that would disappear as quickly as it came. I'd been raising you alone for so long, always worrying about making ends meet. I couldn't believe this good fortune was real or permanent. "And later?" Vanessa pressed. "After the movies, After it was clear this wasn't just a temporary stroke of luck, I gazed out at the twinkling valley lights, gathering my thoughts. Later, it became something else, a test perhaps. A test? Of what? Of whether you would ever see me, really see me, without the external validation of success. I turned to face her directly. You've been moving away from me for years, Vanessa. Not just physically, but emotionally. Ever since you married. Richard, it's as if you've been slowly erasing the parts of yourself that connect to your upbringing, to the life we shared before you entered this world of wealth and privilege. Tears welled in her eyes. That's not true. I've always loved you. Loved me, yes, but respected me? Valued my opinions, my insights, my company? Or was I just an obligation, a responsibility to be managed, especially as I got older? She looked away, unable to hold my gaze. I wanted the best for you. The best according to whom? I asked gently. Did you ever actually ask what I wanted? What would make me happy? Or did you assume that because I was aging, because I lived simply, I needed you to make my decisions for me? A tear slipped down her cheek. I thought you needed me. The admission hung in the air between us, revealing a truth neither of us had fully acknowledged. Vanessa had built her identity around being needed, by her clients, by Richard, by her social circle, and yes, by me. My independence threatened that narrative. I do need you, I said softly, but not as a caretaker or a decision-maker. I need you as my daughter, as the woman I raised to think independently and to see people for who they truly are, not what they represent. Vanessa wiped at her tears with the back of her hand, a gesture so reminiscent of her childhood that it made my heart ache. I don't know how to do this, she admitted. I don't know how to be your daughter when everything I thought I knew about you has changed. Nothing important has changed, I countered gently. I'm still the same person who made you cinnamon toast when you were sick, who helped you practice your debate arguments, who cheered at every ballet recital even when you were hopelessly positioned in the back row. The only difference is that now you're seeing parts of me that were always there, just hidden from view. She was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the garden where the last of my guests were beginning to depart. It's not just that, she said finally. It's also... I'm angry, Mom. I'm angry that you kept this from me for so long. Do you know how many nights I lay awake worrying about how you'd manage in retirement? How many arguments Richard and I had about whether we could afford to support you if your health declined? I never asked for your financial support, I reminded her. That's not the point. Her voice rose slightly, drawing curious glances from a few lingering guests. She lowered it again with visible effort. The point is that I worried. I planned. I tried to be responsible, to do the right thing. And all that time you were... What? Testing me? Seeing if I'd measure up to some standard you never bothered to explain? The accusation stung, but there was truth in it I couldn't deny. I had been testing her in a way, waiting to see if she would value me without external markers of success, if the bond between us was strong enough to transcend the social gulf that had widened between us since her marriage. You're right, I acknowledged. It wasn't fair to you. I should have trusted you with the truth. Then why didn't you? The simple question demanded a level of honesty I wasn't sure I was ready to give, but Vanessa deserved nothing less. Because I was afraid, I admitted. Afraid that if I told you about my success, about the money, you'd see me differently. Not as your mother who had sacrificed and struggled to give you opportunities, but as, I don't know, a resource perhaps, a means to an end. That's what you think of me? Hurt flashed across her face. That I'd only value you for your money? Not consciously, no. But look at your reaction when you thought I was struggling, financially. You didn't ask what I wanted. You made decisions for me. You decided I couldn't live independently anymore, that I should sell my home, that I needed to be placed somewhere appropriate. Would you have done that if you'd known I was E.J. Montgomery? She opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again, unable to deny the truth. That's what I was afraid of, I continued softly. That the nature of your concern for me would change based on my financial status. And it seems I was right. That's not fair, she whispered, but without conviction. Perhaps not, but it's honest. I touched her arm gently. Vanessa, I don't say this to hurt you. I say it because I think we have a chance now to build something new between us. Something based on truth and mutual respect rather than obligation and assumptions. She nodded slowly, eyes still swimming with tears. I don't know where to start. How about we start with tonight? Stay a little longer, have a glass of wine with me on the terrace, and tell me about what you're working on at the firm. Not as my caretaker, not as the responsible daughter managing her aging mother, but as Vanessa, the brilliant, complicated woman you've become. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. I think I can do that. We sat together long after. The last guests had departed, sharing a bottle of excellent Bordeaux under the stars. Vanessa spoke about her work as a corporate attorney, her frustrations with office politics, her ambitions for partnership. I listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering observations that made her look at me with new appreciation. You understand all this, she said, sounding surprised. The business strategy, the legal maneuvering, you actually get it. I laughed. Darling, I've negotiated 6 publishing contracts and 4 film adaptation deals. I've worked with some of the shariest entertainment lawyers in the business. Of course I understand corporate strategy. She shook her head, a rueful smile playing about her lips. I've been underestimating you my entire adult life, haven't I? Probably, I agreed lightly. But then, I let you. That's on me. By the time she left, something had shifted between us. Not healed completely, but beginning to mend. There was a long way to go, years of assumptions and patterns to unravel, but we had made a start. Claire appeared silently as I closed the door behind Vanessa, materializing like a helpful ghost. Would you like me to arrange for the cleaning service to come in the morning, Eleanor? Everything went beautifully tonight. That would be perfect. Thank you. I hesitated, then added, Claire, do you have family nearby? She looked mildly surprised by the personal question. My sister lives about an hour away with her husband and children. My mother is in a retirement community near them. Do you see them often? A small smile touched her lips. Every Sunday. My niece is learning to play chess, and she insists only I'm a worthy opponent. That sounds lovely, I said sincerely. Please feel free to adjust your schedule whenever you need to accommodate family time. That should always take priority. She nodded, a flicker of genuine warmth breaking through her professional demeanor. That's very kind. Will you need anything else this evening? No, thank you. Good night, Claire. After she left, I wandered through the quiet rooms of my new home, still buzzing with the energy of the evening's gathering. Champagne flutes waited to be cleared, flower arrangements remained bright and fresh on every surface, and the subtle scent of good food and expensive perfume lingered in the air. A successful party by any measure. And yet I felt oddly unsatisfied. I had revealed myself to Oak Ridge Heights society, watched people who had previously dismissed me scramble to curry favor, seen the shock and recalibration in eyes that had looked through me for years. I had proven my worth by their standards, wealth, talent, success, and been accepted accordingly. But was that what I truly wanted? To be valued based on external measures rather than who I was as a person? Wasn't that precisely what had troubled me about Vanessa's attitude? That her perception of me had changed based on my financial status rather than any true understanding of my character? I made my way to the third-floor study where my desk stood before the large windows overlooking the valley. Opening my laptop, I began to write. Not a novel this time, but reflections on the evening, on the nature of visibility and invisibility, on the price of being seen only for what you represent rather than who you are. What does it mean to be truly seen? I typed. Not for what you have achieved or accumulated, but for your essential self. Your thoughts, your values, your capacity for both joy and suffering? Is it possible, in a world that constantly reduces us to external metrics, to be recognized for the ineffable qualities that make us who we really are? I wrote until dawn, exploring questions I had never had the luxury to consider during years of single motherhood and financial struggle. When I finally crawled into bed as the first birds began to sing, I felt a curious sense of liberation, as if in exposing one part of myself to the world, I had freed another part to exist more authentically. The days following the party brought a deluge of social invitations, interview requests from local media, and even a call from my publisher suggesting a long-overdue promotional tour for my latest novel. I fielded these with Claire's help, accepting some invitations and politely declining others, gradually establishing boundaries that would protect both my privacy and my newly public identity. Vanessa called twice that week, first to thank me for the evening and later to invite me to dinner at her home. Both conversations were tentative but warm, suggesting a willingness to rebuild our relationship on new terms. What I didn't expect was the note that arrived 4 days after the party, hand-delivered in a cream envelope bearing a familiar monogram. Inside, on heavy cardstock, was a message written in elegant, slightly shaky penmanship. Dear Eleanor, I hope you will forgive an old woman's presumption in writing to you directly. My daughter Eliza forwarded articles about your housewarming party, and I was delighted to learn that it is you, dear lady, who has taken possession of my beloved home. The roses, especially, were my pride and joy for over 40 years, and knowing they are now in the hands of someone who appreciates their beauty brings me more comfort than I can express. If you would be so kind, I wonder if you might consider allowing me to visit when I return to town next month. I would dearly love to see how the garden has fared and perhaps share some of its history with its new caretaker. With warmest regards, Elizabeth Palmer. I read the note twice, touched by its graciousness and the connection it offered to the home's previous owner. I immediately wrote back, assuring Mrs. Palmer that she would be most welcome any time she wished to visit. 3 weeks later, Claire announced that a car had arrived at the gate. Mrs. Palmer is here, she said. Shall I show her in? Elizabeth? Palmer was nothing like I had imagined. Instead of the frail, aristocratic dowager I had pictured, she was a spry octogenarian with bright eyes, a crown of silver braids, and practical gardening clothes beneath an elegant cashmere wrap. Mrs. Palmer, I greeted her warmly. What a pleasure to meet you. Elizabeth, please, she insisted, clasping my hand in both of hers. And you must be Eleanor, the famous E.J. Montgomery. I've read all your books, you know. The gardener's daughter made me weep for 3 days. I laughed, immediately charmed by her directness. Thank you, and thank you for your lovely note. Would you like to see the house first, or shall we go directly to the garden? The garden, if you don't mind, she replied without hesitation. The house is just walls and windows, lovely as they are. The garden is alive. I led her through the French doors onto the terrace where she paused, taking a deep breath of the fragrant air. You've maintained it beautifully, she observed, her expert eye taking in the late-season blooms and careful pruning. Many new owners would have hired landscapers to rip everything out and start fresh. So fashionable these days, those sterile modern gardens with 3 strategically placed shrubs. I wouldn't dream of it, I assured her. Your garden is a masterpiece. I'm merely its current caretaker. She shot me a shrewd glance. A gardener understands that, but most people don't. They want to possess, to control, to impose their vision without respecting what's already thriving. We walked slowly through the winding paths, Elizabeth stopping frequently to greet specific plants like old friends. This bourbon rose was a cutting from my grandmother's garden in Virginia, she explained, brushing her fingers gently over fragrant pink petals. And this climbing hydrangea. My husband brought it back from Japan on a business trip 50 years ago. Everyone said it wouldn't survive our climate, but William insisted we try. He was right, as he often was about growing things. At the center of the rose garden, she paused before a particularly magnificent specimen with deep crimson blooms. William named this one for me, she said softly. He called it Elizabeth's Heart. It's a hybrid he developed himself, crossed from an old damask rose and something more modern. Stubborn as the devil to propagate, but worth every effort. I had noticed this rose before, admiring its unusual color and complex fragrance. It's extraordinary, I agreed. I've never seen another quite like it. Nor will you, Elizabeth replied with quiet pride. It exists nowhere else in the world. William registered it with the American Rose Society, but he never allowed it to be commercially propagated. It was his gift to me alone. We continued our tour, eventually settling on a stone bench overlooking the valley. Claire brought tea, which Elizabeth accepted with a gracious nod. You must wonder why I wanted to visit, she said after a comfortable silence, especially now, when I've moved across an ocean and left this place behind. I assumed it was to see the garden, I replied. She smiled. Partly, yes, but also to meet you, the woman who writes with such insight about family secrets, about the masks we wear, and the truths we hide even from ourselves. She stirred her tea thoughtfully. When Eliza told me who had purchased our home, I read everything about you I could find. The administrative assistant who secretly wrote best-selling novels, the devoted mother who lived modestly while her fortune accumulated untouched, the woman who bought this house right next to her daughters after being told she was too old to live independently. I blinked in surprise. You've done your research. At my age, one develops efficient habits of curiosity, she said with a twinkle in her eye. But what interested me most was why. Why keep your success secret for so long? Why this house, at this moment in your life? The question was personal, even intrusive. But something about Elizabeth's direct gaze invited honesty. I'm still figuring that out myself, I admitted. Part of it was fear that the success wouldn't last, and part was, I don't know, a desire to keep something that was just mine, separate from my identity as Vanessa's mother. Elizabeth nodded. I understand that completely. Women of our generations were so often defined solely by our relationships to others. Someone's wife, someone's mother. Finding space to be ourselves, to nurture the parts of our identity that exist independently of those roles, could be remarkably difficult. Exactly, I agreed, surprised and touched by her understanding. And as for why this house, why now, that was more straightforward. My daughter and son-in-law decided I was becoming too frail to live alone. They had arranged for me to move to an assisted living facility, had even put down a deposit without consulting me. This house was my response. Elizabeth threw back her head and laughed, a rich, delighted sound that made her seem decades younger. Oh, magnificent! What perfect poetic justice! I imagine their faces were quite a picture when they realized the truth. They were certainly surprised, I acknowledged with a small smile. As well they should be. Elizabeth's expression grew more serious. Do you know why I sold this house, Eleanor? I shook my head, curious. For reasons not so different from your situation. My daughter Eliza, well-meaning as she is, began to worry about me living alone after William passed. She started dropping hints about downsizing and more appropriate accommodations. She researched retirement communities and sent me brochures. All very gentle, very concerned. but underlying it was the assumption that I was no longer capable of making my own decisions. She sipped her tea, her gaze distant with memory. I could have stayed and fought, insisted on my independence. But I realized something important. This house, as much as I loved it, had become a battleground rather than a sanctuary. Every time Eliza visited, I could see her cataloging potential hazards, mentally rearranging things to be safer. Our relationship was becoming defined by her anxiety about my living situation rather than by genuine connection. "So you left," I said softly. "I did. I sold the house, moved to a charming apartment in Paris near the Jardin de Luxembourg, and informed Eliza that I would be spending my remaining years traveling, learning French cooking, and perhaps taking a lover if anyone suitable presented himself." Her eyes sparkled with mischief. That last part was primarily to shock her, though I haven't entirely ruled it out. I laughed, enchanted by her spirit. "And has it improved your relationship with Eliza?" "Immeasurably," Elizabeth confirmed. Once she realized I wasn't going to be managed or controlled, she had to engage with me as a person rather than a problem to solve. We speak weekly now, and when she visits, we enjoy museums and concerts instead of arguing about whether my bathroom needs grab bars. She set down her teacup and regarded me thoughtfully. "Which brings me to why I really wanted to meet you, Eleanor. I wanted to offer a word of caution from someone who has traveled a similar path." "I'm listening," I said, intrigued. "Be careful. This house doesn't become for you what it almost became for me. A beautiful prison, a place where you prove a point at the expense of genuine connection." She gestured toward the valley where, I knew, Vanessa's home was clearly visible. "You've made your statement magnificently. You've established your independence beyond any question. But don't let proving your daughter wrong become more important than finding a way forward together." Her words settled over me like a gentle weight, challenging but not accusatory. "That's remarkably insightful," I acknowledged. "The benefit of decades," Elizabeth said with a smile. "We make so many mistakes we can't help but learn something eventually." We talked for another hour about gardens and writing, about the challenges of raising daughters and the bittersweet freedom of later life. When she finally rose to leave, I found myself reluctant to end our conversation. "You must come again," I said sincerely. "Perhaps when the spring blooms begin." "I'd like that very much." She clasped my hand warmly. "And if you're ever in Paris, my door is always open to a fellow gardener and truth-teller." After her, car disappeared down the driveway. I walked alone through the garden, thinking about Elizabeth's words of caution. Had I purchased this house primarily to prove a point? Was I at risk of allowing my justified anger to define my relationship with Vanessa going forward? I paused before Elizabeth's heart, studying its complex crimson blooms with new appreciation. Like that rose, unique, cultivated with care, the product of both old and new influences, my relationship with Vanessa needed careful tending to thrive. It couldn't be forced or controlled, only nurtured with patience and attention to its particular nature. That evening, I called my daughter. "Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" I asked when she answered. "I thought we might try that new bistro." "You mentioned." "I'd like that," Vanessa replied, surprise and pleasure evident in her voice. "But I thought you had that interview with the Oak Ridge Observer tomorrow." "I've rescheduled it," I said simply. "Some things are more important." The bistro Vanessa had suggested was a charming space with brick walls, abundant greenery, and tables spaced far enough apart for private conversation. We were seated in a quiet corner near windows overlooking a small courtyard garden. "This is lovely," I commented after we'd ordered. "How did you discover it?" "One of the partners at the firm mentioned it," Vanessa replied. "Richard and I came for dinner last month." She hesitated, then added, "Actually, Mom, there's something I wanted to tell you." Something in her tone made me pay closer attention. What is it, dear? She took a deep breath, a smile breaking across her face. I'm pregnant. About 10 weeks along. We had the first ultrasound yesterday. Joy surged through me, bright and unexpected. Oh, Vanessa, that's wonderful news. We weren't going to tell anyone yet, she continued. But after our conversation at the party, I realized I don't want to keep things from you anymore, even good things. The simple statement carried a weight beyond its words. An acknowledgement of the secrets we'd both kept, the walls we'd constructed between us. Thank you for telling me, I said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. I'm so happy for you and Richard. There's more, she admitted, a flicker of nervousness crossing her features. Part of why we were so insistent about Sunset Meadows, about making sure you were settled. We were worried about having enough support when the baby comes. Both our careers are demanding, and Richard's parents travel so much. We thought, if you were nearby in a structured environment. Understanding dawned. You wanted me available for childcare. She nodded, looking embarrassed. Not full-time or anything, but yes, we hoped you might help occasionally. It was selfish, I see that now, making plans for your life to accommodate our needs without even discussing it with you. It wasn't entirely selfish, I countered gently. Wanting your child to have a relationship with their grandmother is natural. But Vanessa, you could have simply asked if I'd be willing to help after the baby comes. You didn't need to engineer my entire living situation. I know that now, she acknowledged, and I'm sorry, truly. I studied my daughter's face, the same heart-shaped features I'd gazed at in wonder when she was born, now matured into a woman's countenance. Soon she would experience that same wonder with her own child, beginning the complex journey of motherhood that would transform her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. I would love to be part of your child's life, I said sincerely. But on terms we agree to together, as adults with mutual respect for each other's boundaries and needs. Not as a default babysitter or an obligation, but as a grandmother who chooses to be present. Relief and gratitude washed across her face. That's exactly what I want too. We spent the remainder of lunch discussing her pregnancy, her hopes and fears about motherhood, the changes she and Richard were already considering for their home and careers. For the first time in years, perhaps ever, we spoke as equals. 2. Women navigating life's complexities with different perspectives but shared humanity. As we walked to our cars afterward, Vanessa hesitated, then asked, Would you like to come to the anatomy scan next month? It's when we might find out the gender, if the baby cooperates. The invitation represented more than a medical appointment. It was an offering, a tentative bridge extended across the gulf that had separated us. I would be honored, I replied simply. Driving home to my mansion, still new enough to startle me when I rounded the final curve and saw its grand facade awaiting me, I felt a sense of possibility I hadn't experienced in decades. Not the defensive triumph of proving my worth through wealth or success, but the quieter joy of authentic connection, of being seen and valued for who I truly was. Claire met me at the door, tablet in hand. You have 3 interview requests. From national publications, she reported efficiently. Your publisher called about the promotional tour again, and Mrs. Thompson, Margaret, not Vanessa, left a message inviting you to join the Oak Ridge Arts Foundation board. Thank you. Claire, I said, handing her my jacket. I'll review those later. For now, I think I'll spend some time in the garden. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the carefully tended beds as I made my way to the rose garden. Elizabeth's words echoed in my mind. Be careful this house doesn't become a beautiful prison. She was right, of course. This mansion, with all its grandeur and statement-making power, was ultimately just walls and windows. What mattered was what happened within those walls and beyond them, the connections forged, the truth spoken, the authentic self expressed. I paused before Elizabeth's heart, its crimson petals glowing in the golden light. Like that unique rose, the relationship I was rebuilding with Vanessa would require patience, attention, and respect for its particular nature. It couldn't be forced or controlled, only nurtured with care and understanding. I think we're going to be all right, I told the rose softly. Different than before, but perhaps better, more honest, more real. A gentle breeze stirred the garden, carrying the mingled fragrance of dozens of roses. In that moment, surrounded by beauty that had been cultivated across generations, I felt a profound sense of peace. The mansion next door to my daughters had begun as an act of defiance, a statement of independence and worth. But perhaps its true purpose was something else entirely, not an ending, but a beginning. Not a severing, but a reconnection on new and healthier terms. I smiled, touching a velvet petal gently. Elizabeth was right, I murmured. The garden is alive. And so am I. 6 months later, I held my granddaughter for the first time, a tiny, perfect being with Vanessa's heart-shaped face and curious eyes. They named her Emily Jane, a nod to my pen name that moved me deeply. She's beautiful, I whispered, drinking in her newborn scent as she slept trustingly in my arms. Vanessa, exhausted but radiant in her hospital bed, smiled. I think she has your nose. And definitely your stubbornness. 36 hours of labor. I laughed softly, careful not to disturb the sleeping infant. Strong-willed women run in our family. She's simply carrying on tradition. Richard entered with coffee, his normally immaculate appearance softened by fatigue and wonder. He handed a cup to Vanessa, then surprised me by pressing a kiss to my cheek. Thank you for being here, he said sincerely. It means everything to Vanessa, to both of us. The simple acknowledgement, genuine, without agenda or calculation, touched me deeply. Perhaps this tiny new life was already working magic, breaking down old barriers, creating new possibilities for connection. When I finally returned home that evening, Claire was waiting with a light meal and a bottle of champagne. Congratulations, grandmother, she said warmly, her usual professional reserve softened by the occasion. I took the liberty of preparing a small celebration. How thoughtful, I replied, genuinely touched by her consideration. Would you join me? It seems a shame to celebrate alone. We sat on the terrace as twilight descended, sharing champagne and quiet conversation while the garden settled into evening rhythms around us. Claire, usually so reserved about her personal life, spoke about her own grandmother, a formidable woman who had taught her everything from chess to car maintenance. She never treated me like a child, even when I was one, Claire recalled fondly. She spoke to me like my thoughts mattered, like my opinions had value. I think that's why I became who I am, because she saw me as a complete person from the very beginning. That's a precious gift, I agreed, thinking of the sleeping infant I'd left at the hospital. To be truly seen, not for what others expect or need you to be, but for your essential self. It is, Claire confirmed. And rare. Later that night, after Claire had gone and the house settled into silence, I stood at the windows of my study, gazing out at the lights of Vanessa's home visible in the distance. The mansion I had purchased in defiance had served its purpose. It had shattered assumptions, recalibrated relationships, and created space for a new understanding between my daughter and me. But the true transformation had nothing to do with square footage or property values. It lay in the quiet revolution of being fully seen and acknowledged, of establishing boundaries while maintaining connection, of claiming my own identity without severing the bonds that mattered most. I turned from the window to my desk, where a new novel was taking shape on my laptop. A story about 3 generations of women navigating the complex terrain of love, power, and identity. Writing had always been my sanctuary, my means of making sense of the world. Now it felt like something more. A legacy to pass forward, a truth to be shared, a voice finally speaking without apology or disguise. Emily Jane would grow up knowing her grandmother not as a diminished figure relegated to the margins of family life, but as a woman of accomplishment and complexity, a person with her own story to tell. She would learn, I hoped, that worth isn't determined by external validation but by living authentically, that power comes not from controlling others, but from knowing oneself, and that love, real love, allows us to be exactly who we are. As I began to write, words flowing freely in the quiet night, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me here. Not just to this beautiful house, but to this moment of clarity and purpose. My daughter had said I was too old to live alone, so I had purchased the mansion next door to hers. But what I had really bought was something far more valuable than real estate: the freedom to define myself, the courage to speak my truth, and the wisdom to recognize that true independence includes the choice to remain connected on one's own terms. As Emily Jane celebrated her first birthday in the garden of my mansion, surrounded by roses in full bloom, I marveled at how much had changed in the 18 months since I'd purchased this property. What had begun as an act of defiance, AI's dramatic statement to my daughter that I was neither incapable nor diminished by age, had evolved into something far more meaningful than I could have imagined. The garden buzzed with activity. Vanessa and Richard moved among the guests. Emily balanced on Richard's hip as he proudly introduced her to colleagues and friends. Margaret Thompson, elegant as always but with a new confidence in her bearing, engaged in animated conversation with Elizabeth Palmer, who had flown in from Paris especially for the occasion. Claire supervised the catering staff with her usual quiet efficiency, occasionally catching my eye with a small smile of shared satisfaction. "Quite the gathering you've created," observed a warm voice beside me. I turned to find Charles Thompson in his wheelchair, his speech still halting but significantly improved after months of intensive therapy. "It's wonderful to see you here, Charles," I replied sincerely. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Each day." He gestured toward Margaret, with his good hand. "She's different now, stronger." I followed his gaze to where his wife stood, animated and engaged as she described the Arts Foundation's new community programs to an attentive Elizabeth. "She always had that strength," I said. "She just needed the opportunity to recognize it herself." Charles nodded, a knowing look in his eyes. "Like you, hidden, depths." The simple observation touched me deeply. Charles Thompson, once the embodiment of privilege and corporate power, had experienced his own radical transformation through vulnerability and dependence. In losing the external trappings of authority, he had gained insight that might otherwise have remained beyond his reach. "We're all more than we appear on the surface," I agreed. He smiled slightly, then gestured toward Emily, who was now toddling unsteadily through the garden under Vanessa's watchful eye. "She'll know the real you from the start." "That's my hope," I said softly. As if sensing our attention, Emily turned and spotted me across the lawn. Her face lit with recognition, and she began making her determined way toward us, arms outstretched, babbling excitedly. "I think she's requesting her grandmother," Charles observed with amusement. I stepped forward to meet my granddaughter, scooping her into my arms as she reached me. "Hello, my sweet girl," I murmured, breathing in her baby scent. "Are you enjoying your party?" Emily patted my face with sticky fingers, a stream of nearly words punctuated by the occasional recognizable gamma flowing from her lips. In her eyes, bright with intelligence and curiosity, I saw no awareness of the complex adult dynamics that had once defined my relationship with her mother, no sense that her grandmother had ever been anyone other than exactly who I presented myself to be: Eleanor Bennett, author, homeowner, woman of independent means and mind. Vanessa joined us, slightly breathless from following her active daughter. "She's been looking for you everywhere," she said. "I think she's ready for her story." It had become our tradition. Whenever Emily visited, I would read to her from custom-made picture books featuring a silver-haired grandmother and curious little girl having adventures together. The stories were simple but engaging, perfect for a developing mind, and Emily had come to associate my voice with these special moments of connection. "Story time it is," I agreed, carrying Emily toward the gazebo where cushions had been arranged, in anticipation of this moment. Vanessa followed, and to my surprise, so did several other guests, Margaret and Elizabeth, Claire with a tray of refreshments, even Charles, wheeled over by one of his caregivers. "We're all curious about your storytelling skills," Elizabeth explained with a twinkle in her eye. The famous E.J. Montgomery, reading an exclusive tale for her smallest fan. I laughed, settling Emily on my lap as the others arranged themselves around us. "This is rather different from my usual writing," I warned. "No mysterious deaths or complicated plot twists." "Just what we need," Margaret declared. "Some straightforward happiness for a change." As I began to read, Emily nestled against me, her small body warm and trusting. The story was simple: grandmother and granddaughter planting a garden together, watching it grow, sharing the blooms with friends. But in its gentle narrative lay truths about patience, nurturing, and the joy of shared experience. Looking up occasionally from the pages, I caught Vanessa's eye and saw something there that melted the last lingering frost between us. Genuine appreciation, not just for what I provided as a grandmother, but for who I was as a person. The woman, who had once suggested I was too frail to live independently, now recognized my strength, my autonomy, my continuing capacity for growth and contribution. When the story ended, Emily clapped delightedly and demanded, "Again, Gamma! Again!" But the party beckoned, and Vanessa gently redirected her daughter's attention to the cake waiting to be cut. As guests drifted back toward the main garden, Elizabeth lingered beside me in the gazebo. "You've created something remarkable here, Eleanor," she observed. "Not just a beautiful home, but a center of connection across generations. It's exactly what this garden deserves." "I have you to thank for that," I replied. "Your advice about not letting the house become a beautiful prison changed my perspective entirely." She waved away my gratitude. "You would have found your way there eventually. You're too wise not to have recognized that independence without connection is its own kind of confinement." Her words resonated deeply. In the month since purchasing the mansion, I had indeed discovered that true freedom wasn't about isolation or self-sufficiency, but about the ability to connect authentically while maintaining healthy boundaries. The physical distance between my home and Vanessa's, close enough for regular contact but separate enough for privacy, had created space for a new kind of relationship to develop, one based on mutual respect rather than obligation or dependency. "Will you stay longer this visit?" I asked Elizabeth. "The garden will be at its peak for another week at least." "I've actually been considering a more permanent return," she replied thoughtfully. "Paris has been marvelous for reinvention, but I find myself missing certain aspects of life here. This garden, of course, but also the sense of community I'm watching rebuild around you." "You'd be welcomed back with open arms," I assured her. "Especially by me. It would be wonderful to have a friend nearby who understands the journey I've been on." Elizabeth smiled. "And what a journey it's been. From invisible administrative assistant to celebrated author and community pillar in the space of 18 months. "Not quite," I corrected gently. "I was always the same person, with the same capabilities, the same intellect, the same creative spirit. What changed wasn't me, but how others perceived me, and perhaps how willing I became to be fully seen." "The most powerful transformation of all," Elizabeth agreed. We rejoined the party as Emily prepared to blow out the single candle on her birthday cake, aided enthusiastically by her parents. Watching the three of them together, Vanessa with Richard's supportive arm around her waist, both beaming as their daughter experienced this milestone. I felt a profound sense of completion, of cycles properly fulfilled. I had raised Vanessa alone, sacrificing my own needs and desires to ensure she had opportunities I'd never enjoyed. She had built upon that foundation, creating a life of material comfort and professional success beyond what I could have provided. And now Emily would begin her journey with advantages both material and emotional, not just financial security, but the rich resource of extended family who recognized one another's true worth. "Penny for your thoughts," Margaret said quietly, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of champagne. She handed one to me. "I was just reflecting on how far we've all come," I replied, accepting the glass with a nod of thanks. "Indeed." She gazed thoughtfully at the family tableau before us. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be celebrating my granddaughter's birthday in E.J. Montgomery's garden, while my husband navigated life in a wheelchair and I ran a community arts program. She shook her head wonderingly. Life takes unexpected turns. The most meaningful ones usually come without warning, I observed. Like a daughter suggesting her mother is too frail to live independently, Margaret said with a knowing smile. I laughed softly. Exactly. Sometimes, the very assumptions meant to diminish us become catalysts for our greatest growth. As the afternoon progressed into evening, lights illuminated the garden, creating a magical atmosphere of shadow and glow. Emily, overtired but determined to participate in every moment, finally surrendered to sleep in her father's arms. Vanessa approached me as Richard prepared to take their daughter home. "Thank you for today, Mom," she said, embracing me warmly. "For everything." "It was my pleasure," I assured her. "There's nothing I'd rather do than celebrate Emily." "Not just for the party," Vanessa clarified, her expression serious. "For showing me a different way to be. As a woman, as a mother. For proving that we don't have to diminish ourselves to care for others, that independence and connection can coexist." The acknowledgement touched me deeply. After decades of defining myself primarily through motherhood, to be recognized for the broader example I'd set felt like a profound validation. "We all find our way eventually," I said gently. "I'm just grateful we found our way back to each other." After the last guests departed and Claire supervised the final cleanup, I wandered through my garden alone, savoring the quiet beauty of roses silvered by moonlight. The mansion rose behind me, windows glowing with warmth, no longer a statement of defiance but a true home, a place of both independence and connection. My daughter had said I was too old to live alone, so I purchased the mansion next door to hers. But what I had really acquired wasn't measured in square footage or property values. It was the freedom to define myself beyond others' perceptions, to establish boundaries that protected without isolating, to offer love from a position of strength rather than obligation. Emily would grow up knowing her grandmother not as a diminished figure dependent on others' care, but as a woman of accomplishment and complexity. Someone who had discovered, at 63, that it's never too late to reclaim your narrative, to insist on being fully seen. As I turned toward the house, I noticed a light still burning in my third-floor study where my current manuscript awaited completion. Tomorrow I would return to it, a novel about 3 generations of women navigating the complex terrain of identity, power, and love. Writing had always been my sanctuary, my means of making sense of the world. Now it felt like something more. A legacy to pass forward, a truth to be shared, a voice finally speaking without apology or disguise. Inside, I paused in the grand foyer, remembering the first time I'd stood there after receiving the keys, how alien the space had felt, how much a performance rather than a home. Now every corner held memories. Emily taking her first steps across the marble floor, Elizabeth sharing gardening wisdom over tea in the conservatory, Margaret and I planning community programs at the dining table, Vanessa and I rebuilding our relationship through honest conversations on the terrace. The mansion next door, purchased in a moment of righteous indignation, had served its purpose, not just as declaration of independence, but as the beginning of a journey towards something far more valuable: the freedom to be fully myself while remaining deeply connected to those I loved. As I climbed the stairs toward my bedroom, I felt a profound sense of peace. My daughter had been wrong about my capacity to live independently, but perhaps right about something more important. None of us is meant to journey through life truly alone. The difference lay in the nature of our connections, whether they diminish or enhance our authentic selves, whether they arise from obligation or choice, whether they confine or liberate. In proving I could live alone, I had discovered I didn't have to. In asserting my independence, I had created space for interdependence rooted in respect rather than need. In refusing to be diminished by age, I had opened the possibility for continued growth and contribution. And in purchasing the mansion next door to my daughter's, I had built not a wall between us, but a bridge, one that she and Richard, and especially little Emily, could cross whenever they chose, finding welcome without entitlement, love without obligation, connection without constraint. It was, I reflected as I prepared for sleep, everything I had never dared to imagine during those long years of single motherhood and secret writing, not just financial security or professional recognition, but something far more precious: the freedom to be fully seen and known, to give and receive love without diminishment, to write my own story in relationship with others rather than in opposition to them. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.